The roots of the American Revolution can be traced to the growing tensions between the American colonies and the British Empire in the years following the French and Indian War, 1754-1763. The British victory in the war had left them with a massive war debt and a vast empire to manage. To help pay for this debt, Britain imposed a series of taxes and regulations on the American colonies, which were angered by these measures. These included the Stamp Act, 1765, the Townshend Acts, 1767, and the Tea Act, 1773, all of which were seen as unfair since the colonies had no representation in the British Parliament. Colonial resistance to these taxes and policies grew over the years, and by the early 1770s, tensions were running high. In 1770, British soldiers killed 5 colonists in the Boston Massacre, further inflaming anti-British sentiment. In 1773, the Boston Tea Party took place, when a group of colonists, protesting the Tea Act, dumped British tea into Boston. By 1074, the British government responded with a series of harsh measures known as the Coercive Acts, or Intolerable Acts, aimed at punishing Massachusetts and reasserting British control over the colonies. In response, the colonies convened the First Continental Congress in Philadelphia to discuss their grievances and form a united front against British rule.
First, it gave the Americans a significant military win and boosted morale. Second, and perhaps most importantly, convinced France to formally enter the war on the side of the Americans. France had been providing covert support to the rebels for years, but the victory at Saratoga solidified France's commitment. France's involvement brought vital military aid to the American cause. The French sent soldiers, weapons, money, and ships to support the Continental Army. General Marquis de Lafayette, a French aristocrat, became a trusted aide to George Washington and played a key role in boosting the Continental Army's morale and providing strategic advice. France's involvement also put additional pressure on Britain, forcing them to fight a war on multiple fronts. In addition to France, Spain and the Dutch Republic also provided indirect support to the Americans, further isolating Britain on the international stage. As the war continued, the American soldiers faced extreme hardships. The most difficult period came in the winter of 1777-1778, when Washington's army camped at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. The troops endured bitter cold, disease, and a lack of food and supplies. Despite the dire conditions, Washington's leadership kept the army together. The army's survival was aided by the training and discipline instilled by Baron von Steuben, a Prussian military officer who helped turn the ragtag Continental Army into a more effective, fighting force. The army's endurance at Valley Forge, despite the hardships, became a symbol of the American commitment to independence. The war expanded to include fighting in multiple regions. In the South, the British hoped to exploit Loyalist sentiment and win over the population, but they faced stiff resistance from American forces and local militias. General Nathanael Greene, a commander in the South, successfully employed a strategy of attrition, forcing the British to stretch their supply lines and retreat. One of the major setbacks for the British came in the Siege of Yorktown, in 1781. British General Lord Cornwallis had established a fortified position in the town of Yorktown, Virginia, expecting support from the British Navy. However, Washington, with the help of French forces under General Rochambeau and the French fleet led by Admiral Franois Joseph Paul de Grasse, was able to trap Cornwallis' army on land and at sea. The French Navy decisively defeated the British fleet, preventing any British reinforcements from reaching Cornwallis. The Congress called for a boycott of British goods and began to organize militias for self-defense. In April 1775, the conflict between the American colonies and Britain erupted into open warfare. British troops were sent to seize military supplies in the town of Concord, Massachusetts. On their way, they encountered colonial militias in the towns of Lexington and Concord. The battles of Lexington and Concord marked the first shots of the American Revolutionary War. Though the British had superior numbers and firepower, the American militias were able to inflict heavy casualties and force the British to retreat back to Boston. The Second Continental Congress convened shortly thereafter, and, after much debate, decided to take the bold step of raising a Continental Army. They appointed George Washington, a respected military leader from Virginia, as commander-in-chief. Washington's leadership would prove pivotal throughout the war. The early years of the Revolutionary War were difficult for the American colonies. The Continental Army, though composed of brave soldiers, was poorly trained, underfunded, and lacked the professional leadership and resources of the British military. The British Army, on the other hand, was one of the most powerful in the world, with highly trained soldiers, experienced officers, and a massive navy. In the first major battle of the war, the Battle of Bunker Hill, 1775, the Americans put up a fierce resistance, but were eventually forced to retreat due to a lack of ammunition. However, the battle proved that the American forces were capable of standing up to the British, boosting morale and gaining respect from other countries. Meanwhile, Washington's army suffered harsh winters and inadequate supplies. In 1776, the Continental Army experienced a series of defeats, including the loss of New York City to the British. However, Washington's leadership was tested in moments of adversity. In December 1776, he led a bold and successful attack on Trenton, New Jersey, capturing more than 900 Hessian soldiers, German mercenaries fighting for the British. This victory was a significant morale boost for the American cause. The turning point in the war came in 1777, following the Battle of Saratoga. In this battle, the Continental Army, led by General Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold, defeated a large British force under General John Burgoyne. The Congress called for a boycott of British goods, and began to organize militias for self-defense. In April 1775, the conflict between the American colonies and Britain erupted into open warfare. British troops were sent to seize military supplies in the town of Concord, Massachusetts. On their way,